Hey Seth, welcome back to Talk Python to me.
Hey, Michael.
Uh, awesome to have you here. I'm really excited to get a look into the zeitgeist of the core devs and the people building Python for us through the Python Language Summit.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Uh, so we're going to talk about the 2024 Language Summit that happened in Pittsburgh. It's
hmm
like a embedded mini conference inside of PyCon, which is smart rather than trying to travel all over. But before we get into that and all those things, I know you've been on the show not too long ago, but for those who may have missed your introductions, who are you? What do you do for Python these days?
Yeah, I'm Seth Larson, and I've been working at the Python Software Foundation for a little over a year now as the security developer in residence. And so that means that I do a lot of stuff related to security just for the entire Python ecosystem. That's CPython, pip, the packaging ecosystem, like outwardly facing things for PyPI, maybe not as much the internals. I leave that for Mike Fiedler, the PyPI safety and security engineer. And I maintain a lot of open source projects, specifically in like the HTTP and internet space. So like requests, your lib3, trust store, things like that.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, thanks for everything you're doing there. And how's the role working out? I know this is you were the first person in this role, like officially, right? Is that true?
That is true. Yeah, I was the first security oriented hire at the PSF. It's been going really great. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like we've made a lot of improvements, and there's a lot of exciting stuff that I'm working on today. And I don't know, it. I think one of the things that also got highlighted because this role exists, it just means that more people at the PSF and in CPython core team and just in the Python ecosystem in general are talking more about security. And like that's just as
Mhm.
important as the stuff that I'm doing day to day, is that it's just there's just more awareness of what's happening in security.
Yeah. So I have two polar opposite thoughts here. One is I'm really surprised how few significant issues there are in Python, CPython. You know, the interpreter, the runtime, the standard library, all that. It's really rare that you get a red lights flashing. Oh my gosh, go patch your systems now. Right? There's sometimes really minor things like this audit trail is not completely followed under this condition, but that's not a the pager goes off in the because you got it's now a race. Um, that's one thing. So that's awesome, right? That the other is PyPI, typo squatting, all the stuff that makes Python extra good, the 500,000 packages and other shady things people do. And we're going to talk about this in the broader sense, not PyPI, but
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
the open source space of like, well, what if somebody took over a GitHub account for a little while or something? Yeah, so and that's not on fire, but that's
Yeah.
there are battles being waged
Yeah.
actively there, I would say, right?
Yes.
So
100%.
it's
I
a
mean,
contrast, right?
I can speak with confidence that there is malware on PyPI right now as we speak. But like, yeah, so
Yeah.
that's the case, right? I think it really has to do with CPython is an incredibly mature project in like
Yeah.
every sense of the word, like governance, security, design, all of these things, right? And like there's just a huge amount of people and resources working on CPython at any one moment. And like contrast that to the you said 500,000, I tend to focus on the like 95% of downloads by totality, right? Because there's a lot of projects on PyPI that maybe don't have the supply chain criticality of others, right? But
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
and I think when you hone in on that smaller window of projects, it ends up being a much better picture
I think
than
it's I think
yeah.
it's 100% good
hmm
picture, honestly. There are legitimate bugs that people have to deal with, like, you know, maybe there's a Django release that says we didn't validate the CRF token in this particular form, so you should update your Django, right? And that's just a legit bug. That's not
Yeah.
people attempting to do bad things
And
potentially.
I mean, I can't even take really any credit for how secure and mature CPython is. I'm such a late addition in the life of
Yeah, yeah,
CPython, and like PyPI projects. And so it really is the community. I think it is just, there's so much investment and so much love and care happening in all these projects that it does speak volumes. But that, I mean, that
yeah,
doesn't mean that we need to think that things need to be perfect or that it's necessarily a bad thing to have a
yeah.
vulnerability in a project, because there's projects that are even more mature than CPython that have vulnerabilities all the time. It's totally normal. I think the
Yeah.
important thing is just like knowing what to do when that happens. And that's where I come in.
Yeah. I don't want to belabor this because the security angle, while interesting to me and central to what you're up to, is not the topic. But I do think it's interesting that the White House recently came out. I think it was the White House. It said we recommend Python and a couple other languages. We recommend memory safe languages. Which did you see that post? You must have, right?
I certainly did, and I actually had a big part of recommending that to the White House. So when the
No kidding. I had no idea.
yeah, so the PSF, we responded to the request for information that CISA put out, or the Office of the Cyber Director put out,
Yeah.
I think a year and change ago. And in that post, we recommended C Python and Python in general as a memory safe language, and went into all the details about like, yes, it's written in C, but like the language itself, what people will actually be programming in, is Python. And we also emphasized how Python is a bridge into memory unsafe languages. And because of all the focus on performance lately, it's actually like sometimes in some cases more performant to keep the code written in Python as opposed to writing it in C. And so we emphasized a whole bunch of stuff. And so I think that that had a small percentage of
Yeah.
the reason why that was recommended as
Put
a
it put it
language.
on the radar and positioned it correctly, maybe.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. I was just gonna say that's kind of interesting, but there's way more to it than that.
There's a lot happening behind the scenes. Yeah.
Yeah, there is. All right, shall we talk about this language summit thing?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, let's just I mean, I gave it sort of a vague intro. You wrote a nice blog post about it here on the Python blog, but just give us a sense of what the language summit. What is it for? Like, is this something? Is it like an open space I can go to or not when I'm
No,
at the
so
conference?
so it is a specific space for Python core developers, to use. And so I think the whole goal of this is to get a bunch of core developers in a room together to discuss things, and to kind of get some recommendations, some ideas flowing, maybe without necessarily like having the full formed thought, right? Because like putting
Right.
something out there, like completely radically changing the direction of Python, that's a lot to put that out just publicly, whatever. And so this is like a place to collaborate for core developers and some special guests, because not everyone that's there is a core developer, but it is invite, so you have to like apply to go and say why you want to go, and then
Yeah.
yeah, so
I
it's
think
not
some
just an
folks
open invite.
who were I can't remember if it was Sebastian Ramirez or Samuel Collin or something around the typing thing. I remember some of those folks might have been at one of them because they're like, wait, we can't change typing to be more performant, but where it completely ignores the runtime stuff because we have all these frameworks.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Okay.
the language summit, it's a whole bunch of different like submitted topics. People will talk, and then there's discussion and some outcome. Maybe there's no outcome. Maybe there's like next steps. Maybe we solve some problems within the time of the meeting. And yeah, my job there was to actually like take down all the notes and write about it and like publish these blog posts, because one of the reasons why this is allowed to be like an invite only meeting is that there is someone who is basically taking notes and blogging about everything that gets discussed and like what happened during the discussion, so that then
Yeah.
the community can learn about what actually happened without necessarily, you know, getting the rawness of it, I guess.
Yeah. There's a real careful balance you got to strike between allowing the freedom to say whatever without public scrutiny. But at the same time, you don't want it to be like, well, the Python cabal met. They've
Right.
decided
Exactly.
they don't like your idea or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's cool. So I'll point people. Obviously, it's going to be in the show notes. Point people at your write up. It's like a meta post, I guess. Would you say that? It talks about, sort of
landing page.
landing page exactly for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then nine topics and presentations that were covered, and then the lightning talks, which is also almost like another sub meta section. So there's a lot to explore here, and there's nice write ups on each of these. So where should we start? If we want to kind of wrap up the conversation we were just having, because that was actually a little bit of a topic at the Language Summit, right?
Yeah, security was definitely a topic at the Language Summit. This was somewhat in the recent light, like the light of XZ, when XZ had happened. Pablo, one of the release managers for CPython 3.10 and 3.11, I believe, brought this topic, and it was basically discussing Python's like contribution and release and all of that model in the light of XZ. So like XZ, and I'll just go over really quickly.
Yeah.
I'm
So
sure
tell people about XZ.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people have like heard of it at this point, but
it was such a long game.
Yes.
Deal. It was crazy. So yeah,
that's the scary part.
What is XZUtils, and then what is the XZUtils security issue?
Yeah, so XZUtils is a library written in C for basically processing archives of the XZ format, which is just a compression format, like gzip, like any other compression format, Zotflee, Brotli, all of those. And so this library was maintained by a single person, big surprise, and is relatively little known, right, before all of this happened, I would say. It was probably just adding features, fixing bugs, every once in a while make a release and all of that. And what ended up happening is this project was identified as a project that had very few maintainers, and also through a series of reasons had a linkage to SSH. And so what ended up happening, yep. And so SSH,
if you can get into SSH and SSHD, then bad things are going to happen.
Yeah. So the whole end goal of this entire operation was to get access to OpenSSH through like linking, basically. And so what ended up happening is a bunch of fake sock puppet accounts showed up after this lone maintainer indicated that they were having a little bit of trouble maintaining the project and like meeting user demands. Like these sock puppet accounts show up like days before they were actually used, and all kind of in similar fashion, right? Mm-hmm. And basically are pressuring this maintainer to either make them feel like they're not doing a good job, or to try to add a new maintainer. In this case, Giatan is the pseudonym that this account used. Mm-hmm. And what ended up happening is, over a year of like legitimate positive contribution from this account was added as a like equivalent to a release manager, right? Like someone who is approving PRs and merging things and is capable of accessing the actual archives when releases happen. And then a good chunk of time passes after that, and there's a couple of little changes added that on their own are not an attack, but it was preparing for an attack, where essentially a small change was added into the release archives that was not a part of the source tree that activated the entire attack chain. And then when this started to like be pulled in downstream into things like, Fedora, early versions of Red Hat, this never went into any stable builds, but it was all the pre-releases. This ended up getting onto people's machines, and then was eventually discovered because of a very small performance difference when logging into SSH.
Yeah,
And
and that was
that
somebody
triggered it.
who wasn't even looking. I forgot the person's name, but they worked at Microsoft and they were just, I think, on the Azure team or something, and they just were like, "Why did this slow down a little bit? That's weird." And they're like,
Yep.
"Wait a minute, what is this doing in here?" Yeah,
Yeah.
it was on the verge, and what a long game. One person, one account came along and was just, I'm gonna here to help you. I'm gonna try to just become your best friend contributor. And then another one is just abusing, like mentally abusing the people. Like, why don't you just
Yeah.
quit? Why don't you
Yeah.
get some more support? And then like well, let me reach out to some people who are helping me out recently. And it turns out these are like two sides of the same coin.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, shady. Okay. Luckily that got caught because there's a lot of servers in the world that can be SSH'd into. And like, well, we got, public private key encryption. You can't break through that stuff. As long as you don't use passwords, like you're gonna be fine. Unless you're not.
Yeah.
So
I received a lovely email on the day that this happened. Report to the security response team for Python, because we of course use the XC libraries, because Python supports XC format as well. And there was a lovely few seconds where I'm like, oh, this is either going to be a fine day for me or a really bad day. And it ended up being a fine day. So
that's good. It's like, are we going to be canceling all our plans for the next few weeks?
yeah,
Or?
yep. Am I going to have lots of questions to answer from like concerned customers, users? But no, it was fine.
Yeah. I find this kind of stuff is a lot like everything's fine. You relax. Just work's going good. Life's going good. And then, something's on fire just out of the blue. And you have this, it takes your breath away moment. Like, oh, does that apply to us as too as well? Because if it does, everything just changed. And
Fun
yeah,
times. Fun
yeah,
times.
really glad
Right.
it did. So one of the talks was Python security model after this issue, the XC utils backdoor. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this entire talk was essentially just overviewing, like, hey, is this possible? Is this possible for CPython to be impacted by such an attack? And I mean, the answer is yes, it really is. Because if you have accounts that are willing to put years of effort into contributing good code to CPython, right? Like that is enough to become a core developer, likely. And if you're a core developer, it means you can merge PRs. It means if you get 2 core developer accounts promoted to this level of authorization, you can merge your own PRs with review, right? Like, the big focus on this talk was like, okay, how can we prevent this? And if we, in the ways that we can't prevent it, how can we be ready? And kind of like discussing whether or not we're ready at this point. And I think the big consensus was that if we were to discover something like this that had already been merged into Python or had been released in Python, that we would be okay to be able to get it to like get the word out. Like that sort of infrastructure already exists, and we're not too worried about that. Like we're a CNA, we can create a CVE really quickly. We can get like the announcements out really quickly. We can get releases out really quickly. So like in that way, the reactive sense, we're okay. In the proactive sense, which is the more important one, but it's also the harder one.
Because when nation states hire people to say the next 3 years of your job, it's almost like,
and it's like a team,
like a spy,
team of people for
yes,
multiple
exactly.
years.
It's like the CIA or MI6 or something,
It can
on the code side,
To be honest with you, it doesn't even need to necessarily be like nation state level stuff for this to happen,
true.
because vulnerabilities in popular pieces of software are very, very lucrative. You can sell them, and people make a lot of money on selling vulnerabilities to projects. But so why not grow your own, right?
So
go ahead.
One of the things I think is great is there's a really long release cycle.
Yeah.
Right. And like a staged rollout. So I don't know how many people jump in and install Alpha 1 of some Python, but it's pretty limited and it's not going to make it. No, of course. I know. I see you raise your hand. However, I don't see that shipping on, you know, Ubuntu's update channel or Docker's a whole different deal. Like, let's not even go there. But on the main Docker images, you know?
Yeah. I mean, the slow rollout is definitely a big part of it, right? Like a lot of people get their Python not direct from the source. They get it from a distribution, or they get it from, if they, like Amazon Linux with Python or whatever, right?
Right.
Like it's a distribution of Python
Or
that
brew
has
install
brew installed
or something like
Python.
that.
Yeah. So a lot of people are not living on the edge. And I think that helps in a way. Um, Obviously, people that are living on the edge, maybe they're the more valuable targets, but I mean, I'm not going to be the one to to encourage that.
No.
Yeah, I don't think that. I think the biggest defenses against this, and this was what was discussed there, was trying to push things to be in the open. And actually, in a way, open source is uniquely able to respond and
Right.
be defended against for these sorts of attacks. Because if this were to happen in Windows, for example, like, would we have had the almost immediate, like, being able to debug what the actual attack was, how long this had been going on, what patches were bad, right? Like that sort of visibility into the source code is something that was really important in being able to actually track this thing down. And so, like, having test files and binary files not checked into source code and instead generated. So one of the parts of this attack that allowed it to go hidden for so long and be checked into source code was that almost all of the attack code was hidden extremely well in a binary file, which made it so that code reviewers
some of the test binary elements, because if you got a compression file utility, you got to have compressed files for your unit test, right?
Exactly. So it was basically these files were checked in, and there's just huge binary blobs that you can't actually get your eyeballs on to review. We talk about, like, lots of eyeballs make for shallow bugs. Well, if the eyeballs can't see the bugs, then you're not going to find them. And so we talked about, like, removing binary files from the source code, or making sure that all the binary files that are generated have like a script that allows them to be generated anytime and things like that. So
is it one of the changes recently? I can't remember if this was on PyPI or if this is a GitHub thing, but allowing GitHub to be the thing that publishes directly, builds the wheels and uploads them to PyPI, rather than somebody downloading the code, building them and uploading it, which obviously that's a opaque step there.
Yeah. So other things that tie more strongly these, like, whatever release artifacts are actually ending up on people's machines to the source code. So that's, I mean, I would call that build provenance. There's a whole bunch of different frameworks that works under, but yeah, build provenance, being able to tie in an artifact that's installed in your system back to the actual source code, so that when you are evaluating that that artifact on whether you want to install that on your system, or deciding whether to upgrade or whatever, you can look at the source code instead of looking at this, like, compiled binary. That's something that I really want to focus on for, like, PyPI in the future, but yeah, we're not there yet.
Awesome. Yeah. When you look at a project, you say, well, let's see what the release is on GitHub. If you know that literally that was the thing that compiled or got built, and then that's what's on PyPI, that's a different forensic analysis than
exactly. Well,
somebody's machine.
What it ends up being nice is that and this is the tough part, is that I feel like a lot of people's behavior, which is to go on GitHub and look at the diff between, like, tags, that's what a lot of people do, but that's not actually what you should do. You should be looking at the diff between the artifacts. That's the thing that's actually installed on your machine, but that's way harder to do than looking at the diff tags. So
exactly,
adding build
we just crowdsource it. We're all crowdsourcing it. Like, wait for somebody to scream. I know, we seriously. All right, just related to this, while we're still on this topic, you talked about somewhere. There we go. There's also big news around CVEs, which are official vulnerability numbering. So they're referenced through all those cybersecurity talk and stuff, right? You
Yeah,
can
yeah.
describe it better. But so big news is that the PSF now, and you alluded to this, is now an official numbering authority. So rather than saying there's a problem with Python, who is going to sort of officially call this out and write it up and so on? Like you guys can do that directly now, right?
Yeah, so like CVEs are basically it's a set of identifiers and records that show it's like a bunch of metadata about vulnerabilities in software is what it is. And it's only one system. There are a bunch of other like vulnerability databases, but CVE seems to be the one that everyone uses or references. Um, and so, what being a CVE numbering authority gives us is it makes it so that someone at the PSF can like operate the CVE UI and workflow and all of that to say like, oh, we want to create a new CVE ID on behalf of the Python team or on behalf of the pip team. And what that ends up meaning is that because we are part of the process, instead of having to go to some other entity, so like MITRE or Red Hat or Microsoft, there's a whole bunch of CNAs. There's over 100 now, I think. Instead of going to someone else that isn't as well versed in Python or our release schedule or any of those things, right? We get to inject the knowledge that we have about Python into all of these records, into all these advisories. And it makes it so that we don't actually have to talk to someone else to be able to handle a vulnerability end to end, right? So like before, you would potentially have a reporter going to talk to someone else and getting a CVE ID, and then they would come talk to us. And by that point, like it's hard to like make a determination, and there's a whole bunch of things that have already happened, and maybe there's messes that need to get cleaned up to make sure that it's not confusing. So by owning the entire process, we're able to make sure that things are as little confusing as possible, like what actually needs to be done for users when we publish these things. So.
Yeah, that's great. I want to move off the security angle here because I know there's so much more to talk about. However, I can't help it. Do you guys have you considered or ever run any sort of bug bounty program?
We don't have a bug bounty program right now. I mean, the hard part with the bug bounty program is it takes money. So if you would like to see a bug bounty program happening at the PSF, get in touch with the PSF. Send an email.
Yeah, I think incentives are really aligned there. There's a lot of companies that have this tooling at the center of their data center. So maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe we can make it happen. All right. Next up, the REPL or the PyREPL for the Python PyREPL. What's the deal with this?
Yeah, so this was a talk that was given by a couple of different core devs. I think this included a bunch of people. Pablo, Lukash, and Lissandros all gave this talk, and it was about, hey, this new REPL that's coming in Python 3.13. Here's all the cool stuff that it can do and how it makes the usability so much better for people. And they demoed a whole bunch of the new features, which was really exciting. There was lots of applause showing off a few of these like little features. And I think that the other side of it is like, because this new REPL is written in Python and not written in C, it lowers the barrier for contributions and maintenance drastically. Before, the REPL was like super entwined with like the parser and all of these other really low level details of Python that a lot of people probably didn't want to get involved with if they didn't have to, versus this where it's this completely separate and much more easy to contribute to piece of software.
Yeah. And did this come from the PyPy project?
Yes, this was PyPy, and I think that there's been some back and forth, contributing back, contributing forward, all of that, which is also really great, right? Having one REPL shared between two different implementations.
Yeah, that's great. Just working better together. More people working on it. I always call it PyPy because some people call Python packaging index PyPy. Like, well, that's also this other thing. Yeah. So anyway,
it's a non-zero part of every one of my days, right?
I'm sure that it
is. Because a lot of the times, a significant percentage of my work as a security person is being in working groups that are not Python related at all. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of PyPis flying around.
Yeah, you talk about NumPy being on PyPy, and you're like, okay, hold on.
Hold on, could be two different things.
There's a lot going on here.
Yep.
No, yeah. So this is really interesting. I haven't really played with it much. I honestly don't spend a ton of time in the bare Python REPL. Like if I'm REPLing, a lot of times I'm in the JetBrains sort of enhanced REPL that's inside PyCharm, something like that. And I think partly because there was a lot of challenges with the bare Python REPL, right? There's no autocomplete, but worse than that was if you've got a 5-line function and you want to edit it, you've kind of got to go up to the top hard hitter. It really was hard to work with blocks of code. There's no color, things like that.
Yeah, color is the standard for. If you don't have color in your terminal at this point, like even 20.
Basically, you've given up at that point. If you don't have an emoji and you don't have color, I mean,
emojis, color, you gotta have like the rainbow prompt, maybe like the ASCII logo of the thing when it starts.
A starship. Oh yeah. I didn't even consider the ASCII art and possibly the ASCII art in color. No, seriously though, I do think it sounds like a minor deal, but just the readability of having highlighting and stuff.
Yeah, syntax highlighting is huge. Syntax highlighting is like really huge. That's not a part of the current REPL, I don't think, but like it becomes much more possible because this PyREPL exists.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
very cool.
I think that like the biggest thing, like the whole blocks of code, I just remember the demo of them showing like, oh, you have like 5 lines, you have to hit up like 4 times, hit enter. It's just like,
and if you mess it up, you got to start over.
You got to start over, out of order, and you're just sad. You just contemplate putting it in a file instead of doing this in the REPL. And so,
exactly, that's why I'm not in there. I avoid being in there because it's hard. It's hard to get that right.
This would be really, really great for people that are just starting Python journey, because I think that a lot of people learning and starting off will use the REPL straight up instead of an IDE. And so like having this, there was a big focus on like teachability and documenting it and making it work the same. Like if you actually like read the post, like what the discussions were about, for like everyone was basically totally in favor. They loved it, but they wanted to make sure that this was going to be like a consistent experience. Specifically, like Carol Willing had this big point about like having a consistent experience being really important for teaching Python across different operating systems. So
and something a little bit better than up 5 times and don't get it out of order.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. Though I guess one of the, I don't know if this was discussed, but one of the challenges of this, I think, is it requires, and this is not necessarily bad, but just a challenge, is I think it requires the new Windows terminal rather than say cmd.exe, the older style. So it just works out of the box on Mac OS and on Linux, but on Windows, you got to be a little careful about how you run it. Is that right?
So I actually don't know what the current status of all of this is, because the time has marched on since these blog posts have happened. And there has been a lot of work done on the Windows side. The current team, like the team that presented this, didn't have any Windows experience. And so they didn't know really how hard it was going to be. I think that there's been a lot of strides in the Windows side of things. So I think the situation's better. I don't know offhand if cmd.exe is supported or if it's just the new Windows terminal, but I
think it's fine if it's a new Windows terminal. Like people need to be using that thing anyway.
That's true. It's
like opening up on your Mac and just having like the bare white bash. I guess it's Z shell these days, but just the completely, non-fixed font. You're like, what is this thing that you are running? Like, feel like the terminal is horrible. Like, well, that thing is, but you could make it a lot nicer, by the way. And it's similar trade-off there, right, in the Windows world. So, okay, exactly. Interesting. Next one is, should we adopt calendar versioning? We're beyond 0ver, so that's really good. But there's been a reluctance to have Python 4, but we've got 3.12, 3.13. Are we just going to have 3.128, or should we come up with something else, right? What is calendar versioning, and should we adopt it, and how many digits should it have?
Yeah, so this was presented on by Hugo, who is the new release manager for Python 3, 14, and 15, which maybe that's a little presumptive saying those numbers. Because if this goes through, that would not be the case anymore.
He's going to work himself straight out of a job here. What's going on?
Yeah. This was there were definitely jokes about like this is just your attempt to get out of being the release manager for these releases. But yeah, so Hugo proposed this. This is kind of like a pre-PEP feeling out of how this situation should be, and like trying to pare down the options. I think was Hugo's biggest question, or what should we do it, and should we pare down the options because there's a million different ways we can do calendar versioning. And yeah, I think if you scroll down, there was like a slide that had just, every single possible calendar versioning possibility for Python and all the different languages. But yeah, calendar versioning is like really common for programming languages and other things that are similar to Python. And so this was basically like, hey, we have this yearly release cycle that is been working for a while, and we're probably going to keep doing it. Should we?
It's worth pointing out for people who don't know that it used to be 18 months. And so the calendar versioning would get a little out of phase or something there. But now that it's yearly in the fall, it really lines up perfectly.
Yeah. And so this kind of assumes that we're going to keep doing the yearly thing, which I'm fine with the yearly thing. But yeah. As long as we kept the yearly schedule, it would the release year would line up with whatever so it would be like the one that was like most agreed upon was like 3 dot and then a 2-digit year, or what would end up becoming a 3-digit year when we roll over to 100, assuming that Python's still used in 100 years. But yeah, so like that was kind of like the one that was most palatable to core devs, or people were most excited about. And I think the big reason why switching to like a Calver year was interesting is that we have this thing called like support lifetime. So like how long is CPython supported? How long do you get security fixes? How long do you get bug fixes?
Right.
So
like yeah, exactly. Like, let me put this out to the audience. Is Python 3.8 supported, or is it not supported? I don't know. You got to do math. You got to think about it. Yeah, so 3.7 just recently dropped support, right? Which is crazy because that seems like a pretty new version in my mind, but it totally makes sense. But if you just knew it's supported for how many years? 6 years? 5 years?
It's 5 years for security releases, I believe.
Yeah. So then you're like, it's 2025, so 2020 is out.
The math becomes a lot easier.
And you also say, like, do I have the current one, right? If you're not tracking it super carefully, like 3.11, is that the latest? Like, I don't know. I only use Python every like once a month. But what's the 2023? Oh, I see. Well, maybe that's not the latest one. Okay.
Yeah. So it was just an interesting conversation about figuring out what the best potential option was, and then Hugo ended up creating a PEP, and I think that's being discussed right now. So
cool. Why not 2024? Why 24? Because that feels, I don't know, it just feels like you've just point shifted what you're doing now rather than really clear. Because, as a new person coming in, you don't see that and go, oh, it's 24, so it must be 2024, unless you really like put together the calendar version. But if it's a .2024, you're like, I bet that's the year,
Right. Yeah. I mean, because eventually in the not too distant future, there will be a Python 3.24.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll see. So there's going to be a PEP around this, you say. In fact, it says right here, PEP 604, right?
I think it's PEP, what is it like?
Oh, wait, no, that's just the yearly announcement.
If you scroll down all the way to the bottom, we'll
find some PEPs.
Yeah, there's a lot of PEP
drafting. It just says drafting a PEP.
Go, give that a click. I'm pretty sure there's a number, 2026. There we go.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, so that's going to be a while till they release this PEP.
Well, so
I'm just kidding.
the most important part of this discussion was that the Python version 3.14 be preserved. Python. So
yeah, cool.
It wasn't allowed for 3.14 to change it.
Yeah, the only thing that I can think of that you would have the 2 digits is that there's a lot of code and regular expressions and junk out there that checks for that. But, you know, if we talk about some of the other stuff out there, like that's a pretty minor change.
It's true.
Like, for example, free-threaded Python.
Yes, free-threaded Python. It's here.
It is here,
Yeah.
sort of.
Yeah.
You know what actually really surprised me is when I saw this PEP come through, was it 702 or something like that? It said, we're going to allow free-threaded Python, which I'm going to have you explain for folks in a moment, but you're going to have a special build of it. And I thought, oh, well, that means if you want to play with it, you're going to have to build your own. But I noticed that the installers now give you an option for it.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, the
Like
installers
to pair side-by-side install.
Right. Yeah, what is it? I think there's like a T that gets put onto your actual like
Yes,
binary.
Python T is what you type instead of Python.
Yeah, if you want the free-threaded one.
Yeah.
I mean, free threading is here. I mean, there's options. If you're compiling it yourself, you just enable some options. And I think I go over that in the actual blog post too, the options that you actually use to try it out. And yeah, free threading essentially it's a way to remove the GIL and move to a different like reference counting model, object counting model. And which is quite exciting for a lot of people, but what it will end up meaning is that a lot of the packages that are written in C or that are relying on CPython APIs will have to get either, tweaked a little bit to like use these slightly different C APIs to make it so that they play nicely with having no GIL enabled and with the new memory management.
Yeah. It's
So
super
it requires
exciting.
some changes from the ecosystem, basically.
Yeah. Just because you have threads doesn't mean you get perfect scalability across the cores. I can't remember who wrote this article. Is it Simon Willison, maybe? Who did I'm pretty sure it was Simon Willison who wrote one that said, look, we're going to take an algorithm that is kind of embarrassingly parallel and parallelize it. And it turned out to be something like 50% gain per core. So it was like he had 8 cores and it was 4 times faster with free-threaded Python than without, which is still, if you can get your code to run 4 times faster, that's still really good, right?
Yeah.
But it's going to have, like you said, I think it's going to have an interesting requirement put on all the people building packages, right?
Yeah.
And I know when I hear people say, I think maybe you just said like, oh, it's going to be the C extension packages that are really going to have to deal with it because they'll have to do locks in their thing. I think even in the Python code, there's certainly algorithms that have multiple steps that they'll get some data here, they'll work with the data, they'll make some changes, then they'll put the data back in the same place. And even that would be subject to a race condition.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I've in the past did a lot of C++, I did a lot of C#, and in communities like that, people are like always focused. They're like always kind of crazy about 2 things, memory and threading. Right. And we just don't do that in Python. I think we have just leveraged the fact that the GIL gives us kind of enough coarse grain granularity, the execution of our code, that it's just not something we hit a lot. And we don't try to do a ton of threading because it doesn't work all that well. However, this could expose lots of stuff. This could put a new focus on that.
Yeah,
good and
definitely.
bad.
Yeah, just having more people using threading with Python, that's going to be huge for finding thread safety issues. It's just really exciting. I think that, and there's another blog post, a completely separate one that talks about like the C API, and there was some mention about like free threading and evolving the API so that it's a lot easier to use from a free threading perspective. So like there's a ton of work happening in here to make this as easy hopefully brief kind of split in the ecosystem and then have it converge together. I think that's like the overall plan is like, okay, we gotta have a way that if this is really not working out, we can go back. But if it is working, we need a way that we can actually land this thing as the default. And,
right.
Yeah.
Right. And the PEP discusses this is like, we're gonna see how it goes.
Yep.
which is really interesting. But I think it's not breaking in the sense that you can't still run Python 3 with the thing that you've got. You just might not be able to enable this free threading aspect of it for some time. Whereas from 2 to 3, it's like you cannot run this library on 3, period. There's no scenario which this is going to work because it needs to take into account this and it doesn't, and so it's out. So I feel like there's more time and space to evolve it. And you could say, well, in this space, in this data science section of the world, we use these 7 libraries and we're going to work and make them compatible so that we can get way better performance. Or, we're going to work to make sure that Fast API and Pydantic support it really well so that we can scale our web servers better, whatever.
Yeah. No, this will be huge for like web and data. I think that a lot of people are excited for this for a really good reason.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. Okay, so this is a big deal. It's coming in 3.13, but you've got to run Python T for now.
Yeah, it's 3.13, but it's also available in the pre-releases. The first release candidate for 3.13 is out, so give it a test. If you haven't given it a test, give it a test.
Yeah, very cool. All right, what one do we want to talk about next? We got just a couple more minutes to cover. We've got, what about Python on mobile? I think that one's, I know there's the Black Swan talk that Keith Russell McGee gave, and Kara Willing also sort of shouted out, like, there's a couple of places that are really, really important computationally in the world that Python kind of isn't. Yeah. We should have it there. And number one has got to be mobile.
Yeah.
Mobile and front end. For me, mobile and front end are the two. And like a far distant behind that is like, could I get a single binary out of my app that I can give to someone? That's a different, that also is in there, but it's like not as important as, hey, I want to build some mobile apps. Can I use Python? I want to learn that with an easy language. Can I use Python? Like, ask me something else.
Yeah, right. Like, next question. So this was almost like a big status update on where Python is in the mobile space, which is really exciting because they've made a ton of progress on getting like actual tiering of support for these platforms. So if you don't know, Python has a like platform support tiers where it's like tier 1 is like x86 Linux, right? Like that's 90% of PyPI downloads are that, like,
yeah,
probably want to support that one. And then it's things like Mac OS, x86 and ARM and all of that, right? And then lower down there's tier 2, which is the platforms that they have people that are interested in them, but if those people were to go away, then we wouldn't actually have a way to support them. And tier 3 is like even more so, right? So having tier 3 support for Python for both Android and iOS for 3.13, like, that's super exciting. It means that these things are getting actively tested. There's like integration testing on real platforms, and that there's people that care about it that are fixing bugs. And this is exactly what you need to get your platform supported. And so this is all being provided by Anaconda funding this project, and Beware.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. They are, Beware and Keith has been on this for a long time, but Anaconda have come along and put more time and energy behind it in terms of funding, and I think maybe people as well. I'm not sure, but certainly in funding. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it was both a status report and also kind of trying to figure out how these sorts of platforms can get tested more easily, and like actually not having constant breaking, because these platforms are so different from what almost every other core developer is using to develop Python, are a lot more limited in terms of capabilities and like locked down in a security perspective too.
And they have no regard for backwards compatibility. It's so frustrating. I have mobile apps for the Talk Python courses that are in both iOS and Android's app stores. And I'll get messages like, hey, dear developer, if we see that you're built against 3-year-old APIs. If you don't rebuild and republish your app in the next 6 months, we're taking it out. The last one I did this for was Google. I'm like, 3 3 years. Okay. Can we? No, we can't get any better compatibility than that. Like, I just got to keep re-uploading the same thing, even if there's no changes. Like, so, that's just a different mentality of like, we changed all that. We don't like that anymore.
Yeah, luckily, I'm actually not sure how affected Python in particular is by things like that, because that's like utilizing APIs, like mobile SDK APIs, versus like the operating system of the phone, which
Yeah, right. Like people would build apps with Python and then they would be subjected to these emails. And it's not even that I was necessarily using any of those APIs. It's just like we see you're compiled against the wrong version, so try again,
yeah, no, the difficulties that I've, at least from this talk, have figured out is that like these platforms are just a lot more locked down. So like a lot of system calls won't be available that the test suite like assumes are available always, and
Sure. It's almost like a circuit Python sort of deal, but not that extreme.
It's it's like somewhere in the middle, and figuring out how to all work together happily and develop on this similar code base that has all these different target platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I'm really excited. I'm all here for it. If 3 years ago, I think it was, when we started working on those mobile apps, if I could have used Python in a really solid way, 100% those apps would be built in Python. But just there's so much tooling and stuff around now. You got to create a signed APK before you upload. There's a lot of stuff going on there, and so hopefully they get that. That would be a game changer. And just it's not on. It wasn't here. Almost surprises me that it wasn't here. But front end stuff, WebAssembly, PyScripts, Pyodide, all those things I think are in that same realm. Although they can just kind of ship stuff to the web because there's no gatekeepers, but still.
Yeah.
Was that mentioned anywhere during the summit that just didn't make a post?
No, WASM was not. There was no topic about WASM specifically at this language summit, at least.
Yeah, sure. I think there was the previous year.
Previous year there was, yeah.
Should we make PDB better? Does it matter? Are people using PDB? What do you think?
Yeah, so this was all about, PDB is Python's debugger, for people that don't know. If you've never used it, it lets you kind of like set a breakpoint in Python and then drop into that exact spot with all the context and everything, which is
right.
Really
at a lower level. Yeah, at a lower level than VS Code or PyCharm.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Seeing all these like super internals of Python, if that's something that you really need, right? And so this was a talk that was mostly about, okay, we have PDB, but now we have all of these new models like free threading and all of that, and also we're being a little bit held back by backwards compatibility. There's like a really specific point where because of backwards compatibility reasons, and PDB is a part of the Python standard library, it becomes difficult to break backwards compatibility, even if it would mean you get a bunch of really good stuff out of it. You can't always do that because people are depending on it. And I think that the recommendation was maybe we should develop this outside of the standard library so we can, break backwards compatibility if it's not necessary, and make it so that we can support multiple versions instead of just having it be per version. And
that's a good idea. That's exactly what I was thinking, because there's the whole dead batteries talk. Like, does this still belong here? I'm not necessarily thinking this should not be in Python, but something broken out maybe, but take that exact code, break it out, but enhance it kind of independently.
Yeah, and I think the concern from some people in the room was that, if we break this out onto PyPI, then it would potentially mean that it would not get the same level of contribution that PDB sees because it's part of Python, right?
Sure.
And I mean, totally valid in my opinion too. Like, being a part of Python is a huge blessing of this is something important, right? But
Yep.
I think that there's other ways to signal that it's something important. Like if you look at like MyPy is underneath the Python GitHub organization. And so maybe something like that, right? Where it's this tool that is very actively used by core developers for development. And it is
Right.
a little bit more official than, just some random person putting something up on PyPI. This is core developers supporting this. So
And Black is that way too, I believe, right?
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe something to signal just a little bit more of an official, this is a core developer tool. Here's why you should contribute to it, instead of just, a random project on PyPI, which it definitely wouldn't be in that case.
It would not. It would definitely not. All right. How about a quick review of maybe some of the lightning talks we've
Yeah.
got? Any of these stand out? I mean, obviously, Rust and Python is seriously one.
Yeah, Emily's talk was.
Yeah, as I say, Emily's got a good one.
Emily has a really good one because, and this is like it's almost meta, right? Because lightning talks are not submitted ahead of time. You actually have to submit them during other people's talks, like to the list that you want to talk about this, and then put together some slides really quickly. So yeah, these talks are pretty impressive in that way, having mere minutes. But Emily's talk was about. It was kind of like wrapping up a theme that was being heard multiple times over the course of the Language Summit. But obviously, this is a problem outside of the Language Summit too, which is that when someone goes to make a prototype for a PEP, they are given, at least today, not a whole lot of support for doing that prototype, because it's basically like, oh, we think that this should be developed outside of the standard library initially, right? Like that's a really common determination that the steering council comes to. And so being able to have kind of like a standardized way that people do a PEP prototype outside of the standard library. So things like creating a repo and like having all of this existing infrastructure set up, and maybe even hosting it under the Python GitHub organization to give it some like air of officiality of like, yeah, this is something like really big is happening here. It's not just like someone in a corner writing something, right? Like giving some more grandiosity to the work that's being done, and not just kind of saying, oh, go away. Like that isn't the intention, right? But that's kind of how it can land sometimes.
Right. And maybe setting up people for success. At least this is what we're going to expect from you. If you go through this process, then you're further down the pipeline of having that conversation for a PEP.
Yeah, definitely. And like if you're wanting to write something that is for Python, you probably don't necessarily care about like setting up these exact workflows for publishing to PyPI. Like that's just a whole bunch of things that are in your way to actually being successful. So having that all be figured out already ahead of time for you makes things a lot easier for you. So
Yep. All right, let's finish it out with Yuri Silvanov's presentation, efficient data sharing between subinterpreters. And it's interesting because we talked about free threaded Python, but the year before, the big news was subinterpreters and Eric Snow's work. And those are not directly competing type of things, but in a sense, they're kind of competing.
Yeah, they're definitely competing for being like the model of how to do efficient, parallelism in Python.
Yeah. How do we isolate this stuff so that we can avoid the guild? Do we take it out and add different algorithms, or do we just make copies of the interpreter and run them in isolation? But then you have this data sharing issue. I can't just share a pointer easily, right? So what's this about?
Yeah, so Yuri basically came with, and this was also if you want the extended version, Yuri also gave like an actual PyCon talk about this library that he's developed called Memhive.
What's it called?
Memhive, like MEMHIVE. Yeah.
All right, awesome. And just for everyone listening, just this week, last week, recently, all the videos of all the talks are now available on YouTube. So it's been a while coming, but you can go watch it now.
Exactly. So go watch them all. If you missed out on a talk, go watch them. But yeah, this library in particular it's basically a way using immutable data structures, there's this immutable data structure called an HAMT. I actually don't know what it's short for, but it's a hash array map tree. There we go. It was I wrote it down. And it's essentially like a way to have this tree that can be passed around and shared without like worrying what the other processes, subinterpreters are. They're not processes. The other subinterpreters are doing to this data structure. So it enables a more efficient and safe way of sharing data that's kind of like in a tree structure. And I think the demo that he ended up giving was about a dictionary like data structure where, you have a million keys and a bunch of subinterpreter workers working on that data, and they're able to, because it is using this immutable data structure, the modifications and changes are all safe, but it's also like super scalable and performant.
Yeah. The thing about parallelism and multi-threading is if it's immutable, you can have many things as you want reading from the same memory. It's only when they start writing does it matter. So
exactly. Yeah. And this like has a mechanism to capture the writes in a way that is safe, so that like the current one can see what has been written, and then the other ones aren't affected because their copy is not changed.
Okay, that sounds very interesting. And we talked about the coming compatibility matrix of free-threaded Python. This won't have that issue, right? This operates in every version of Python.
Yeah, so I would assume that this sort of module would be able to say, like, I am ready for a GIL-free world. So that's like the mechanism that I believe CPython has adopted for saying that your C module is ready for not having a GIL. You actually have to opt into it, and then that module will be allowed to run in free-threaded Python.
Yeah. And something I recently learned is there's separate wheeled builds for free-threaded Python as well. Yeah. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it's its own, I don't know exactly the phrase for it, but yeah, its own wheel tag.
Platform target or whatever.
Platform,
yeah. Like free-threaded gets appended to, Mac OS ARM64 or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Seth, this has been great. How about some parting thoughts? Let's close this out with just takeaways from the whole experience.
Yeah. I mean, the Language Summit is lovely. One of the things that's like most important to me is like this whole aspect of storytelling. And so that's why I felt really, really happy that I was invited along to be able to tell these stories to all of you. And I think that having all of these different narratives all in one place of all of these huge themes about what Python is going through all at once, right? Like, it's really incredible how many different things are happening in Python all at once. And like sometimes when you're focusing on just one or just two, you don't have this huge context of, wow, Python is changing in like at least 20 different ways all at once. And we're somehow doing really, really well, I would say. Like,
yeah,
I have no doubt about any of these huge changes that Python is going through, like to take it in the wrong direction. Like, I'm feeling hopeful and excited about all of them. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, I am as well. And it is really tricky to get a picture, a holistic picture of the progress, because there's a lot of different groups doing different things, and there's no one person's or one company's job to get somebody to come and tell that story. So yeah, thanks for giving us the insight here. It's been awesome.
Of course.
Yeah. Thanks for being on the show, and I'm sure we'll have you back soon.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
See ya.